that I was confronted with or was on my plate was likewise on the plate of the Board of Trustees now. Traffic, business development, green space, it was all part of the fabric of the village to determine what is in the best interest of the village. For a period of time, from the sidelines, I observed what I thought was decisions being made and actions taken that needed to be changed, hence my involvement with FABGC. Candidly, I think that the village needs to reinvent itself, reinvigorate itself, so that it can become and go back to the greatness that it was before. There was, at least in my time, there was an episode in which Saks wanted to move to Roosevelt Field, and the problem was that there was traffic and lots of it. So that was part of the effort that I put forward representing the village as a trustee before both the court and the zoning board, the Town of Hempstead Zoning Board. That was a cooperative effort that I believe was and should be put together again. Thank you.
And Charlie.
Hi, my name is Charles Kelly. I'm a federal prosecutor. I was one of the founders of Revamp as we tried starting about 2 years ago to stop the Maryland Avenue project and to halt the breaches of the agreement between the village and the railroad and the MTA. And obviously it's turned out to be quite a problem, especially for those of us over here in the estate section. And hopefully we can have a better process than we had with Maryland Avenue, where my comments at Board of Trustees meetings were often interrupted, often cut off, and the trustees would start discussing out loud whether my 4 minutes were up yet when I was speaking. Totally different now. The board has been transformed into a taxpayer-friendly place where they're open to questions, they're open to comments, and they have respect for the taxpayer funds. And I think that's a big change. I'm chairman of the law subcommittee on the St. Paul's Committee, and I'm chairman of the Village Board of Ethics. Thank you for joining tonight.
And Charlie, before I ask any other questions, could you tell the folks who your favorite neighbor is? Just kidding, you don't actually.
Jane O'Keefe.
I live down the block from Charlie. That hurts. All right, first question, Bruce. Could you tell us a little bit more about your time as trustee, back when you were trustee, and especially your work challenging the development of Village Hall?
Initially, when I became an EPOA president, the issue before the village was the Board of Trustees seeking to demolish Village Hall and turn it into a supermarket. Candidly, we were probably one vote away from that program occurring. There were problems with almost all of the villages on Long Island for purposes of redevelopment. And they retained an expert who decided that putting a big box store on Stewart Avenue was the solution to their problem. I pretty much led, together with the other POAs and all of the businesses on 7th Street, the opposition to that development. And that was my first experience with a Board of Trustees that did not listen and did not care. It was a scary time, to say the least. When you had the homecoming parade on 7th Street, all of the businesses on 7th Street put black bunting on their windows to show their solidarity that the proposed conduct in selling Village Hall was not in the village's best interest. There were many committees that were formed in which alternatives to the pressure to continue the mantra of Franklin Avenue being the Fifth Avenue of Long Island. And it was very difficult to get an understanding to the Board of Trustees. They just did not want to listen because some of the big landowners had their own objectives. One of which was have more restaurants, have more businesses, have more medical offices. So how Franklin Avenue changed is part of the effort of myself and other individuals getting on board. One of the projects that I was involved with was the determination of what to do with Saks, because it was about to be moved to Roosevelt Field. And it was determined that there would be a lot of traffic, and the intersection of Clinton Avenue, Clinton Road and Stewart Avenue would really be severely impacted. So that was one of the fights that all of the POAs, but noticeably the East, participated in. And kudos has to go to Eileen Murphy, who is Tom O'Brien's, or was Tom O'Brien's mother-in-law, who led and got all of the information with regard to the development of Roosevelt Field and how that the racetrack was going to be developed. And similar to the railroad, you have to dig up all the underlying information. Otherwise, a project can go forward and there's nothing that you can do about it. So here I am back again for round 2.
Thanks. And for folks who joined recently or on Facebook Live, feel free to type a message or question into the chat or use the reactions button at the bottom to raise your hand if you want to ask a question live. One that came in from chat here regarding Raymond Court. There's been a lot of noise and now it's front page news. What's next for Raymond Court? Let's go with Larry.
Okay. Excuse me, folks. I'm fighting a cold here. Apologies. I think Raymond Court's an interesting situation because I think to some people, this is a bit of front page news. I mean, I know for a fact that we've been looking at this for a couple of months at this point, so it's by no means, a recent development. I think at the end of the day, when you look at it, a bunch of it comes down to a fact of how it was actually handled, from the very beginning. And that's the part I think that one would want to question and to see and make sure that things like this would not happen again. So if you look into the situation, as it unfolded, there was a study done for what I think is a fairly reasonable sum of money to see what could be done around the putting in a parking space, a parking lot. And then unfortunately, as part of that study, it doesn't seem like anyone did anything around a question really a study on 2 points, right? The question is, number one, is it necessary? And number two, how would you do this in such a way that it does not really create a significant amount of damage, right? The impact, I guess. So necessity and an impact study, back to back. And then, of course, the third part of this is really, did you talk to the people? So I think looking at this from where we stand now, was the first part of the study done? Yes. So, there was money allocated. That budget was then raised without really any details around why it was raised. And there was no study done around whether there was a need and or, how do you do this with as little impact as possible? And I think the last part, which is the part that's most egregious, is that when you talk to the folks that live on Raymond Court, they weren't consulted. In fact, speaking with the residents there, it sounds almost like they went to some of the meetings, and to echo some of Charlie's comments, their concerns were really dismissed, right? I mean, these are people that live on the street, that have their children playing in the street today, okay, who bought a house on a dead end street for a reason and want the quiet of living on that kind of a street, that are now having to deal with concerns around their children out in the street playing and cars going down their road. So, it's interesting that it's been, that it has gotten to be front page news. Hopefully we can do stuff about it. But I think the bigger question is, how do you prevent it in the future? And then what do you do with them today? So I think, in the future, the question is, if you're going to do something like this is going to actually directly impact the people in the area. Let's actually make sure that it's necessary, but also let's make sure that the people that are most directly impacted have a say in what happens to their neighborhood. It is damaging. They moved to our town for a reason. And I feel like their views were not really considered when they actually went through this. And then the question now is, what do you do with them? Right? I mean, there's lots of different options one could consider, but I think the main thing is you need to make sure that the people on that street feel comfortable living there, number one. And part of that is making sure they're comfortable with their children that are out playing. Are they concerned about traffic? So I think there's a number of things we're considering about how we can help the people that live on Raymond Court. But I think the better part is just making sure that the process in the future for things like this, is done with a lot more transparency and a lot more input from residents that are impacted, to make sure that, we hear their views and that they're accounted for when you make a decision like this with, what is a significant amount of funds from the village taxpayers.
Thanks. Charlie, this is something that you've spoke about quite a bit. Do you have anything you want to add?
I think Larry is exactly right. It's a failure of process and communications. There seemed to be no interest in having a communication strategy. There were only 20 homes, probably less, involved who were being directly impacted. And those people could easily have been reached and consulted, and it would have taken one person 20 minutes just to put a flyer in each store on the block and tell them this was going to be on the agenda next week. And if they had any comments about putting a parking lot at the end of their dead end street, they might want to drop by to the trustees to talk about it. But that there was never a communications strategy, and that strategy should have been not only for the residents of Raymond Court, but it should have also been for the taxpayers, in as much as $400,000 was being spent on a non-emergency construction project that would impact, of course, all taxpayers, because it was our $400,000 that went to put a parking lot at the end of a dead end street, which is sort of hard to believe, but that's what they spent $400,000 on. And I don't think any of the alternatives that I mentioned in my letter to the Garden City News last December were explored. Thanks.
And I think one thing just to add to Charlie's comment, and I know there's some people were asking questions about, concerns and commentary that was made on it. I mean, the funny part is that all you have to do is talk to the people on the street about how they feel. And, probably the ultimate is the gentleman who was at the end of the block, and his commentary was, look, I lost my privacy, right? I mean, it's not like, it's one thing to have the traffic here, but at the same time for him, given he's the one who's most exposed to the lot itself, he was very clear. He's like, I moved to the end of the block because I wanted the privacy, et cetera, and now I've lost my hedges, lost the cover that I had on my house. I mean, I think the town has helped him to a bit, but if you've got someone who lives at the end of the block where there's a massive amount of protection between him and the mall, he now has a fence to stare at, right? And cars that park there for events. So he's probably the most dramatically impacted, and we're gonna see how we can help.
Thanks. Mary, this one's specifically for you. Could you talk about what you're most proud of over your last year as a trustee?
I guess, it's hard to pinpoint one thing. I think the being part of, increasing community engagement and working with residents. We have so many talented residents in the village who want to be engaged, and being able to work with folks as a trustee and increase that engagement and give more opportunities is something I've enjoyed. The Environmental Advisory Board is kind of a prime example. We have 8, great members with all this expertise and interest in community education and advising the board on environmental matters. And it's been really great to work with them and we had a great water program last night. Everyone's heard about the landscaping licensing and the gas powered leaf blower. So I've enjoyed very much working with that group and really having meetings that have engaged many residents beyond the board as well. Also just going to the governance committee meetings, the meet and greets is something else I've enjoyed. Getting to know, hear from residents, their concerns and interests, and change the kind of culture we had before, which is what brought me to run, and the others as well. I think, that feeling like you weren't being listened to if you went to a meeting, you weren't going to get an answer. It's been, gratifying being part of turning that around for such a wonderful village.
Thanks. The next one I'm going to ask first, although please feel free to jump on after, folks. There was a comment at the BOT meeting this week about the DPW and water superintendent and generally having lower village headcount and its impact on municipal services. Have any thoughts on addressing?
If you don't mind, I can do it from both a historical perspective from 20 years ago and a present value perspective. Yes, in fact, during a period of time, there has been a substantial reduction and what I would consider to be a privatization of some of the municipal services by prior boards of trustees. Candidly, unless you have the boots on the ground, you can't deliver municipal services. The streets are dirtier, they're not fixed. The bushes are not cleaned. How many times do you wind up going past CVS and look at the fountain and you wonder, what are all the riffraff doing in that fountain and why hasn't it been cleaned? There's many things that prior boards have done in a guise of saving money, but has reduced the quality of life. There are many factors about the village that are perceptibly worse over time that need to be addressed. And if you wind up losing 100 or 150 employees from the village, yes, you can save money. If you privatize it, the question really is, how good are they? Are they up to your standards? Do you think that 7th Street is as clean as it has been in the past? I think that we really should look carefully at a village that prides itself on trees, not having a village arborist. There's a direction that you can go, and that when you trim muscle and not fat. And I think we're well past that location right now.
Oh, sorry, let me unmute you, Charlie.
Yeah, I agree with Bruce. I mean, I wrote a letter a few months ago talking about the state of trees in the village, and that we need a village arborist, and it's important to get a green project going where our target on trees is much higher than it is currently. Both the storms, the maple disease, there's been so many impacts that have depleted the number of trees in the village, including, of course, the MTA and the Long Island Railroad. In addition, I think we should have a water superintendent, and I know this was brought up at the Board of Trustees meeting 2 nights ago, and the mayor indicated that there was a search ongoing for a water superintendent, that we need somebody with the background and the expertise to do that. So as Bruce indicated, there's been a lot of critical positions left open and empty, and it certainly harmed the village. And village administrator Swazi cannot fill every position that we've ever had. We have to start filling those positions and paying for them without selling more parkland like the trustees had done a few years ago. Thanks.
If I can also segue, I was on the Fire Safety Committee, and I still am, and we're in the process of presenting to the Board of Trustees our suggestions and recommendations. And candidly, the village did not conduct itself appropriately in maintaining its own infrastructure. We are now in a catch-up mode to fix buildings that should have, for the last 15 years, been attended to instead of being left to decay. Prior administrations have railed against the casino for not maintaining that building, which is in fact owned by the village. And yet they at the same time allow the infrastructure in many different locations to deteriorate to a substantial extent. So one of the comments that I have is the same standard that applies to the residents should apply to the village. And if you have a house and you're building a house and want a zoning variance, you are obligated to contact all of your neighbors to seek their permission and notify them of what you intend to do. So how can the village conduct itself and not do the same thing? The hypocrisy that has occurred is staggering.
I feel like you almost just answered this, Bruce, but what is your position on implementation of the recommendations of the Fire Safety Committee? Anything to add beyond what you just said?
I believe that the number of man hours that were put into that study and the presentation that was made clearly shows that action needs to be taken. It should not allow to go much further without the implementation and the budgeting for that infrastructure that is needed. The fire department is such that you can't call a timeout while you're in the midst of fighting a fire. You have to be prepared. You have to have the boots on the ground.
But isn't that, I mean, but isn't it true, Bruce? I mean, the work you've done, I think it's in line with a lot of stuff that we talked about with FABGC, is a question of, you know, whether it's the fire or anything else. It's a matter of, you know, being judicious with what we're trying to do, right? Not going out like previous administrations when you're looking at the work that was going to be done on the firehouse on Edgemere Road, which was a bit of an outlandish number, but let's actually do the right thing for the community, make sure that, you know, we are properly prepared, and we make sure that we ourselves as well as our neighbors are safe, number one. And you know, what dictates that is a reasonable amount of money as well as time and effort is spent towards making sure we're prepared in that space, and not just go out and spend, you know, what are really egregious amounts of money for something that's really not necessary, you know, especially in these days.
You have to investigate, you have to document, and you have to implement.
Yep.
See, Charlie, this one's pretty close to your heart, I imagine. The third track project is a disaster. What more can we do, and do you still have hope for a favorable resolution?
I still have hope. Yes. I wouldn't say I'm overly optimistic, but I still have hope. I know that the mayor and the current trustees. They've been working with the Long Island Railroad and trying to work something out. I also think that we have an opportunity to look into, get an independent legal opinion as to whether the village may bring an action in nuisance and breach of contract and condemnation and so on and so forth, arising out of the damage that's been done to the neighborhoods. There's an estimate floating out there of about $20 million of value has been lost. I know if you just go over and stand near those lights at night, it's ridiculous. There's no way that the power of those lights can be permissible when they're pointed at residential homes. And obviously there's the poles and there's the sound walls that were an absolute total failure, put up wrong. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's one more card that we may have to play, and I think we should get a legal opinion, independent legal opinion as to whether or not the claims for what was done here, those claims are viable claims with a reasonable chance of success. Starting that lawsuit would not only give the village a chance to recover funds for the village for all the damage that's been caused, but would certainly enhance our position vis-a-vis discussions with the railroad, the MTA, and the third track, which seems to be doing so much to harm the neighborhoods surrounding the projects. And it seems so inconsistent with what we were promised and what was in the memorandum of understanding.
Anything to add from anyone else? Okay. Sorry, Charlie, another one for you. Could you please clarify the planned goal of the St. Paul's Committee?
Well, the St. Paul's Committee was always started to bring a referendum to the Board of Trustees, a 2-question referendum. The first question was to be, do you approve of our plan to renovate and rebuild St. Paul's at a cost of X for the purpose of Y? Or do you want the St. Paul's to be demolished at a cost of Z? And it was always my understanding and my expectation that if in fact the vote was significant for demolition, and if demolition proceeded, there would be a second referendum where we would simply ask village residents if they preferred to leave that 8 or 9 acres as green space, or if they wanted to have a new recreation center put up, including, for instance, an indoor-outdoor theater. The idea was to take the elements of Cluett Hall and the Field House, which probably don't have that many years left, and duplicate them in a new rec center on the plot where St. Paul's is now. And so that's what my understanding was, and that's what I envisioned, and that's what I've been talking to people about, a possibility of a second referendum if demolition was prevailed in the vote. And we have a highly qualified St. Paul's Committee with all the resources and talents you would want. And we intend to come up with a plan that we think is viable for going forward. with the project, but that would simply be one question in the referendum.
Thanks. Any other opinions on St. Paul's? It's not a, I imagine everybody's got one.
Well, no, I think to Charlie's comment, I think it's quite funny. I remember when my high school junior was about 6 playing soccer over at St. Paul's, and her asking me politely, "Dad, what is that?" "Well, that's St. Paul's School." "Well, what is it?" "Well, it's an old school. It's, no one uses it." And she kind of understood that. And then asked me politely, "What are we going to do with it, Dad?" I said, "That's something we're going to figure out, right? We still haven't figured the answer to that out." I think in talking to individuals who've spoken with the mayor, he did a visit into the structure. It sounds like it's in a lot worse shape than we thought from the inside. Sounds like there's some real concerns about, its viability, period, unless we're willing to invest a significant amount of funds. I think as a community, and to echo one of Bruce's comments before, us trying to, let's stay current, folks. It's a beautiful structure. We've let it get to the state that it's in. And I think we as a community need to be very clear with, our fellow residents on what we want to do. Let's keep it very direct. Let's as a community decide what we want to do and then make a decision rather than just let it sit there and continue to have rain fall in, continue to have, continue to have it deteriorate, right? Because it's just going to continue to deteriorate unless we decide to do, one of two things: either renovate it or we get rid of it and we replace it with something that the community can actually use and take advantage of. So I fully agree with Charlie's view. We need to make a very clear decision as a community, and then we can decide a way forward.
Hey, let's go to Bruce. What are your plans for dealing with the commercial vacancies and the eroding tax base because of it?
The commercial vacancies is a complex problem because the village actually doesn't have that much control over private land. Now, there is the feeling that if you have a building taken over by a nonprofit, i.e. a hospital, that there is an erosion of the tax base. A certain amount of case law is out there, both with regard to pilots, payment in lieu of taxes, and there is also some case law and developing field in which there is a limitation on or an expansion of what that municipality can look to that landowner for. However, balance that against all of the activity and all of the spin-off of individuals coming in, eating in your village, utilizing village facilities and businesses up and down. So there is a need for the village to integrate, make contact with, and assist in the development of the properties, being a good neighbor, but making sure that that neighbor likewise understands the benefit that they get. So I think there should be a liaison, excuse me, between the Board of Trustees and the commercial community so that it is a symbiotic relationship and not one-sided.
Anything to add, Larry?
No, I agree with Bruce. I think one of the challenges, and as Bruce highlighted before, right, when Saks was on its way to move over to the mall, I think we as a community need to be aware of that, right? We need to make sure that we keep as many stores as possible within Garden City. I think we're gonna face a similar challenge as we go forward, as you see companies that are online are further and further pushing, bricks and mortar stores, right? So I think at the end of the day, the key thing is to make sure we get a view from a community level on, what are the best things that we can do. If it's a matter of pilots as an opportunity is one thing, right? As a way to get payments, in lieu of the taxes that would have to be gotten. But at the same time, I think I also agree with this statement that, you have to say to yourself that with the medical offices taking over where Sears was, there are going to be people coming in that are going to be using the restaurants, that are going to be, shopping in the stores. So it will also be adding to the tax base, though not directly. So I think both of them need to be studied.
Similar to what has occurred and is occurring at Lord and Taylor, in which you will have that you'll have commercial on the first floor and business on the second floor. Take a look at what happened with the Saks business building and how the market changed and how the Phoenix rises is a lesson that all of us need to remember, that merely because it is empty today, it is an opportunity that a developer is waiting for. The Sears was empty for years and years. Nobody shopped there. But now you have a substantial construction that is occurring, and it's going to be more lively and used. Just remember, though, as it is used, you may have more traffic. So there is a balance that all of us as a community and as a board of trustees must address so that we have the best plan in place and we're not playing catch up to create and solve problems that we could have avoided.
Okay. Just a couple more questions here, unless we end up seeing more as I ask these. What do you think about rejoining the urban consortium? Let's maybe start with Charlie. Or
Yeah, I never understood why the village trustees voted 8-zip on the first day they could get out of that to get out. I haven't learned anything that suggests that it would be a detriment to the village to have access to the information that flows through the group and to have an acquaintance with the people in the group. It seemed to be a knee-jerk reaction against the settlement of the lawsuit, and it seemed to me that I could not come up with any reason why we would not want to rejoin it. And so unless some reason surfaces, I don't know why the village would not want to be part of it, to show that we're open to different things in this village and not reacting in a negative way to councils that are moving things in a certain direction. So I was very disappointed. I know it got the village more bad press to do it. There didn't seem to be any upside other than just a group of trustees venting against, I guess, the settlement.
thanks. Last one, I think. I was glad to see that Shafford Avenue was repaved. Is there a schedule for repaving the adjacent streets? And how do the candidates feel about the condition of our roads? I'll ask Mary to talk about at least the schedule, and then get everyone to kind of talk about the current state of the roads.
Sure. So there is a schedule, and I don't have it here with me, but there's a process we go through in determining which roads get paved, the order of the paving of the roads. And we have a company assess them. So it's not done based on, who happens to complain the most or where someone may live. So they're categorized by need. And I think it's everyone agrees that we're behind on the road work and that the roads are not in good shape. And in the last budget, we actually increased the money to repaving, in recognizing that, hoping to start to catch up. We have fallen behind, I think, over a number of years on, what should have been the schedule for repaving. So there's work to be done, and we're on that.
To add my own to this just a little bit, wasn't there, and I asked this because my own street seems to be, the problem seems to be where they've opened the road over and over again to connect gas lines or fix water lines and things like that. Wasn't there a recent one of those where a utility company opened the road that we were going to pave soon anyways, and we ended up getting it covered 50-50 or something like that, Mary?
That did happen over in the western section, and Ralph Swazi is trying to, plan ahead and look so we can do that more. It's not always, we're working with getting this scheduled. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be times, I think, always when you pave a road and then work has to be done afterwards. But that is something we're looking to do, and it can save us money as well if we coordinate it.
Thanks.
Just let me give a little inside information, and that with the planning of what roads are to be paved in the future, the village sends out notices to all the utilities that if you plan on having or need to have work done, do it before we wind up needing to have the road repaved, in order that we don't wind up paving it and then having it chopped up the week after it's put down. So there is quite a process, and has been in place, of seeking the cooperation of all the utilities, that they look in advance as to what they need to do. And that, of course, is more important now with regard to any work that needs to be done with regard to the water connections in the event that there is found to be any lead in the service connection. That should be done before we repave the road and not after.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
We have reached the end of our questions, folks. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share? Larry, could you maybe tell us when and where people should vote?
Okay, everyone. So first and foremost, thank you very much, everybody, for joining this evening's session. Hopefully you've learned a little more about us. So if this is your first time, nice meeting you. If it's your second time, hopefully we continue to see more of you on different FABGC events. To John's comment, the voting will be on March the 15th. So the Ides of March for any of the Latin fans out there. It's going to be held over at St. Paul's, over at the rec center. I forget the name of the rec
Field
center
house.
in St. Paul's. I'm sorry.
Fieldhouse.
Oh,
Field house. Sorry, it's the field house. Apologies. Haven't been there in a long time, but it'll be at the field house over on March the 15th. If at the same time there are absentee ballots available, if you want them, there's a form that we'll either get to you if you need one, or they can be picked up at Village Hall. It's your choice.
Do we also have that on the website, John, for FABGC?
We do. Thank you, Mary.
So
We
it's
do.
that easy. You can actually just print it off the FABGC website or the village website, fill it out, and get it to Village Hall, either by dropping it off or mailing it. That's your absentee ballot application. And anyone can vote by absentee ballot this year based on concern over COVID. So you just say temporary illness, and that's considered, concern of COVID is considered temporary illness. Obviously, if you're going to be out of town, that would be another reason to vote by absentee ballot. But you just have to get that to Village Hall. Then you will get the ballot in the mail. You fill it out and you send it back in or drop it off.
Wonderful. Thank everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
thank you.
Good night.
Good night.